Hey guys, first Regardsman here, and so I'll be talking about future classes for Space Marine 2 post Techmarine, what Saber has said about their plans regarding this, and what classes I would personally like to see next. Now, Techmarine has been out for about 2 weeks, and a lot of players are still in the process of leveling him, but the community response has been pretty positive to the class overall. He is a lot of fun to play, has multiple builds that all feel unique, and his brand new weapon, the Omniscient Axe, might be my favorite melee weapon in the game currently. They even put out a hotfix earlier this week that made him even stronger by replacing his worst team perk with one of the best armor regen effects in the game, so I would say he's in a fairly good spot right now, especially considering this was the first class added to the game since launch. But this leads us to the biggest question a lot of players in the Space Marine 2 community have, which is what will the next class actually be? There has been a lot of speculation regarding other potential post-launch classes we could get after they announced Techmarine last year. Many players want things like an Apothecary, Chaplain, or even a Terminator, and Saber Interactive has actually said they were planning to add extra classes to this game way before Techmarine was even announced. There are actually old interviews prior to even the launch of the game that stated they always intended to bring new class options, just like they've done with other Horde titles they've made, like World War Z. But as far as classes post Techmarine are concerned, Focus Entertainment's community manager stated that they were waiting for the launch and response to Techmarine before talking about the future additional classes. But they have made some prior statements on what classes they would prefer to add and what classes they outright don't plan on doing anything with. So the first potential new class I'm going to talk about here, and what's probably the most popular among the general community, is the Apothecary. Now, Apothecaries are the primary medical support class for both Firstborn and Primaris Astartes. These guys specialize in recovering gene seeds from fallen battle brothers, and also have specialized versions like biologists who beyond healing will also buff their teammates. Healing class archetypes are generally very popular in pretty much any horde shooter, and a game where reaching 0 HP means you go down or you instantaneously die. Any healing effect is going to be incredibly powerful simply because they dramatically increase your margin for error. The popularity of healing was already shown in this game on launch, with classes like Vanguard and the community's overall opinion on perks for them like Unmatched Zeal and Invigorating Icon. And in Saber's other horde shooter, World War Z, the medic class is one of the most popular in that game as well, so I'm not really that surprised that Apothecary is a highly requested addition to Space Marine 2. Personally though, I am not all that interested in an Apothecary class. Any team or armor healing effects this class could use would either be redundant with classes like Vanguard and Bulwark's team healing and armor regen, or they would run the risk of being completely game breaking because the healing effects we have in game currently are already some of the strongest perk effects available. Though that being said, there could be unique buffing mechanics for your teammates, like granting them damage reduction through stim injections with a Primaris Biologist Apothecary instead of like a standard medic one. These function a bit more like team buffers and enemy debuffers, which could be interesting for a gameplay loop independent of pure healing. Saber themselves also previously stated that they were not a huge fan of healing effects in general for this game, and they have nerfed perks like Invigorating Icon before, so I really don't think an Apothecary class is their first choice. And a class like this, if it is a powerhouse of healing, could have the issue of players viewing it as a mandatory part of their team comp. This is already kind of a problem with classes like Vanguard and Bulwark, where players will occasionally flame their teammates for not taking healing perks, and if they do add a healing based Apothecary, they might even rework perks like Unmatched Zeal and Invigorating Icon, which they've talked about doing a bit previously. And while I may not like an Apothecary as a class archetype myself that much, I think healing perks are actually pretty good optional choices for the game's player base, because crutch mechanics allow more players to engage with different content, and as long as it is not interrupting other players' experiences, which I really don't think healing perks are, I think it's a great thing for the game. But let me know what you think about the addition of an Apothecary class to Space Marine 2. How would you like to see this be implemented, and if you think Space Marine 2 even needs a healing class at all? Now, another class I hear people bring up all the time as a potential addition is a Librarian class. Librarians are the Psyker or Space Wizards of 40k and can be found in both Astartes and normal humans alike. A big controversy about these guys being added to Space Marine 2 is that a lot of players think they would be too powerful compared to other classes. Librarians are among the strongest members of their chapters. Ones like Mephiston could obliterate whole gargoyle swarms all on their own, but to be honest, I don't really think that matters all that much in the current state of Space Marine 2. This game is hardly one-to-one with the power scaling of the 40k universe at large, and it's not exactly like that power scaling is particularly consistent to begin with, and even Primaris Marines are generally far less powerful than they are showcased in this game. So I would be all for a Librarian class in this game. I think a caster playstyle would add to the current lineup of classes perfectly, and things like a Psychonetic Dome or a massive AoE Warp Lightning Horde clear option with 4 staves and 4 swords would would be one of the coolest things we could have in Space Marine 2. Unfortunately though, Focus has come out and said they do not intend to add Psyker powers to the game currently. Now that doesn't mean they will never add a Psyker class, but it's just highly unlikely, and I think that we will most likely find a Librarian class in Space Marine 3, and I might even prefer that over having one added very late in this game's life cycle with something like a year 3 or 4 addition to Space Marine 2. I expect this would be the most popular class release for this game. This is also a class they would have to nail the mechanics of, and I would rather that be a class saved for what is hopefully a superior game to Space Marine 2 with Space Marine 3. Space Marine 3 is confirmed to have a 4-year dev cycle, so I'd really not expect a Librarian class until at least 2029. And on the note of other popular class suggestions, many players bring up Terminators, but I'll be real, Terminators are just too unique even compared to Librarians to really fit into a standard Primaris squad. These guys were playable back in Space Hulk Deathwing, they are much slower than your standard Space Marine, and the main way they circumvent that is with their deep strike ability that allows them to teleport behind enemy lines as a shock trooper. That would be cool to see in this game, but they usually operate as an entire team of Terminators. I just don't see that being added to Space Marine 2, though if you do want to play as a Terminator, they are available in the Astartes Overhaul mod on the Nexus, so if you have a PC that interests you, then you can definitely give that a try. So Apothecary seems unlikely, and Librarian plus Terminators are pretty much a guaranteed no, so what class is likely to come to Space Marine 2 next? Well, one of the most likely options if they are seriously committed to not having a healing Apothecary would be a Chaplain class. Saber's creative director had an interview with Well Played prior to the launch of the Reclamation update in November of last year. In this interview, they talked about the reasoning behind choosing Techmarine as the first class that they were going to add to the game, and what other classes were in discussion, and the creative director had this to say about a Chaplain class in Space Marine 2.
And it's, I think the thing is, some of the characters have a more limited weapon set, and that means that it can be difficult to implement in a way that fits into the combat style that is Space Marine 2. There's been lots of discussions about it, but I think ultimately we opted for the Techmarine because it was a better fit, and I think we had more demand for it as well. So,
really?
You know, I mean, yeah, you'd be surprised when we see the data come in, but it's, I think, like, it's definitely, the Chaplain is such a fantastic character to explore, and is so different from the rest of them by the nature of their role. So I would love to play with that more.
The fact he said that this is something he is personally interested in, and he is the creative director of Space Marine 2, does lead me to believe that this is probably what we will see for a new class next. I will leave a link to the entire interview if you want to take a look for yourself. I think this is the best interview we've had with the devs since the launch, and it's a great watch. Now, having a Chaplain would potentially mean you would be playing as Leandros, but I don't really see that as a downside at all, because Leandros, despite being kind of an ass to Titus in the campaign, is actually a pretty good Chaplain, and Leandros also sounds cool as fuck while wearing his armor in the campaign, so I see this as an absolute win if we do actually get to play as him. As far as how a Chaplain class would actually play, having a melee team support that just spits out litanies the entire time, buffing up your teammates with damage reduction and damage dealt, would be a pretty unique role. It would also mean that we could get another class-specific melee weapon with the Crozius Arcanum. These are the signature weapons of the Chaplains in the tabletop, and bonking Tyranids and Thousand Suns while dishing out the aforementioned litanies does sound pretty epic. That seems like a pretty satisfying gameplay loop to me, but let me know what you guys think. Do you want a Chaplain class? Is that something you are interested in, or would you prefer an Apothecary? And more importantly, how would you feel about playing as Leandros in Space Marine 2? We know there won't be any campaign DLC for this game, so a Leandros cameo is the next best thing, right? The final class I want to talk about, though, as a potential addition to Space Marine 2 is the Judiciar. Now, I think this one is less likely than a Chaplain or even an Apothecary. A Judiciar is often a Chaplain in training. These guys have access to massive relic blades, and Saber has said previously that their top priority for a new melee weapon would be a greatsword of some kind, and considering the Omniscient Axe is one of the most unique melee weapons in Space Marine 2 currently, I'm actually really excited to see how they implement an actual greatsword. Now, unfortunately, a relic blade would not be an easily transferable weapon to other classes like Blade Guard, Primaris, for example, because they don't really have this as part of their standard weapon loadout. But even if that's the case, relic blades are one of the coolest melee weapons in 40k, and I love seeing them in Dark Tide, so having one in Space Marine 2 with unique executions would be pretty damn awesome. Now, another thing that's an interesting mechanic around Judiciar would be the Tempor Mortis. Basically, they carry around a time-slowing hourglass in combat that slows down enemies in a limited area around them to make them easier to kill in melee. This could be really interesting if it interacts with enemy range attacks like Zoanthrope balls or Soul Cannon Terminator missiles, slowing them down to make it easier to dodge, or just nullifying them, and the visual representation of that sounds pretty appealing as well. These guys would also not have a primary range weapon, so unlike the Techmarine, we'd be getting a class with a melee weapon plus war gear, and a secondary as their only weapon options. This would also put the current selection of primary melee classes from 3 to 4 in the game. I'm all for another melee class in the game though, because whether it be a Justiciar or an actual Chaplain, I think the melee combat at this point in Space Marine 2's life cycle is far superior to its ranged gameplay loop, and melee weapons usually feel like a far more substantial addition to the game than ranged anyways. But those are the major potential classes I want to talk about today. I am a bit curious on the community's opinion on this. What do you guys want to see the most? Do you want a straight healing Apothecary or Biologist? I think both an Apothecary and Chaplain would probably be received the best by the community at large, but we'll see what Saber actually has planned next. Because like I've said before, Saber has been waiting to see how Techmarine will be received by the Space Marine 2 community at large, and considering the Techmarine update was the biggest update we've had for this game since patch 10, and the DLC voice pack controversy aside, the response was generally positive to the actual content and new class, I do think Saber will prioritize more classes in a year 3 for Space Marine 2. We do have Warhammer Skulls coming up fairly soon, and the year 2 roadmap is going to get updated the next month or so as well to better reflect upcoming content, since the Techmarine update launched a little bit later than they expected. But that is all I have to say in this video, guys. Let me know what class sounds the most fun for you and what you expect from the future of Space Marine 2. And if you like content like this, subscribe for more, and if you want to ask me questions about the game or just come hang out, you can find me live here on YouTube or on Twitch with a link in the video description alongside a link to my community Discord. And as always, thank you for watching, take it easy, bye.